Imagine a world on the brink of change, where the future of a new nation hangs by a thread. One fateful day, a clash of powers will determine the future of the American colonies, forever altering the course of history. The Battle of Yorktown, the decisive moment that ended the American Revolution, is often described as a victory, one that secured the birth of the United States. But how did it unfold? How did a ragtag army of revolutionaries manage to defeat one of the world's most powerful empires? Was it a battle of sheer willpower and determination? Or did something much larger, something more unforeseen, play a role in this victory? What were the stakes of this final battle, not just for the American colonists, but for the future of the entire Western world? As the armies converged, the world watched in suspense. Would General George Washington's audacious plan succeed, or would the rebels find themselves crushed beneath the weight of British power? The walls of Yorktown, Virginia, would soon bear witness to the final struggles of men who believed in freedom against all odds. Every cannon shot, every maneuver, was a gamble, the stakes, nothing less than the birth of a new nation. But victory is never guaranteed, and the story of Yorktown is one of grit, surprise, and the unexpected twists of war. And it all began with one simple question: could they really win? Number 1. The calm before the storm. What if the end was already determined before the first cannon fired? In the months leading up to the Battle of Yorktown, an air of uncertainty hung heavy. Washington's forces, though battle-hardened and fueled by their desire for independence, faced what seemed like insurmountable odds. They had already endured years of hardship. Yet, it was not their strength that would win this battle. It was their cunning, the unexpected alliances that would shape the tide of war. At the heart of this struggle was a paradox. The American revolutionaries were struggling to gain a foothold against one of the world's most formidable armies, yet their most significant advantage lay in the very thing that made them appear weaker: resilience and the unwavering belief in their cause. But could that resolve hold under the weight of impending disaster? The British had been confident throughout the conflict, and their leader, General Cornwallis, believed that victory was within his grasp. His forces had secured countless victories over the years, pushing the Americans to the edge of collapse. Yet, in the humid, oppressive heat of the Virginian summer, the British leadership failed to see the shifting tide, unaware of how the French, vital allies in the fight, would soon alter the course of the revolution. Washington knew this. The arrival of French reinforcements, both in manpower and naval power, would be the secret weapon. But could these forces arrive in time? Could they mount a decisive assault, or would the British succeed in breaking the resolve of the American forces one last time? But Yorktown was more than just a location. It was a symbol, a final test of whether the American dream would survive or die in its infancy. And as the British army dug in, ready for what seemed like an inevitable victory, Washington prepared his final move. The tension mounted, as whispers of a coming French fleet spread like wildfire. Would they arrive on time? The fate of the revolution lay in the hands of those ships. A single mistake, and the revolution would crumble. The question loomed larger than ever. Would the British empires might overwhelm the American revolutionaries once again, or would the balance shift, changing the course of history? Number 2. The siege begins. Could Washington's bold plan survive the test of time, and the British defenses? As the siege of Yorktown began, the world held its breath. Washington, with his French allies, laid siege to the British forces holed up in the town, but the question remained: could they break the fortified lines that the British had set up? The British forces had one clear advantage: their well-fortified positions within the town and their powerful naval forces, which were supposed to help relieve the siege. Cornwallis had no intention of letting his army fall to the rebels, but time was running out. His supply lines were dwindling, and the air was thick with the fear of impending defeat. The American forces, with their French allies, attacked with relentless determination. Night after night, the sounds of cannon fire and the cries of men filled the air. But the British did not give up easily. Cornwallis's men fought back, their resolve matched only by the American and French forces surrounding them. And then, on October 9th, a key moment arrived. The French fleet, led by Admiral de Grasse, appeared on the horizon. The British Navy, which had been expected to break the siege, was nowhere in sight. The French had arrived just in time, effectively trapping Cornwallis's army by land and sea. The British could no longer escape. Cornwallis had to make a choice: continue to fight a losing battle, or surrender to the overwhelming force that surrounded him. But surrender was not so simple. Cornwallis, in a final act of defiance, refused to attend the formal surrender ceremony, sending his second-in-command instead. The irony was not lost on the American and French forces. The British had always held themselves in high esteem, but now they were reduced to submitting to a group of rebels they had once considered beneath them. This was the moment of no return. Cornwallis's men could no longer fight back. Would this mark the end of British dominance in America? The fate of the revolution rested on the decisions made in these tense moments. Would Cornwallis choose to fight on, or would the inevitable surrender signal the end of British control over the American colonies? Number 3. The surrender. What does it truly mean to witness the fall of an empire? On October 19, 1781, General Cornwallis surrendered to General Washington, bringing an end to the American Revolution. But what many fail to realize is that the surrender of Yorktown was more than just a military victory. It marked the symbolic death of an empire's dreams of maintaining its colonial control over the American colonies. The British forces, crushed and defeated, marched out of their fortified positions, their heads low. The Americans and French watched as Cornwallis's men laid down their arms, their uniforms torn, their spirits broken. The formal surrender ceremony took place under the bright Virginian sky, but the tension was palpable. The American and French forces stood tall, a unified front. The British, on the other hand, walked out as a broken, defeated force. The gravity of the moment struck everyone present. A new nation was born that day, but the reality of this victory would not settle in until later. In the aftermath, it wasn't just the British that felt the weight of the loss. The American revolutionaries too understood that the hard work was far from over. Though the battle was won, the war had taken its toll on them. The price of liberty was high, and Yorktown was only the beginning of the journey to true independence. Cornwallis's surrender may have marked the end of the fighting, but what came next was equally important. Washington, victorious but weary, now had to steer his troops towards the future, a future where they would face not just the British, but the challenges of creating a nation that was truly free. Would the revolutionaries be able to navigate the difficult road ahead, or would the cost of war shatter the dream they had fought so hard to achieve? Number 4. The global implications. What if this battle wasn't just about one nation's freedom, but the very structure of global power? While the Battle of Yorktown marked the end of the American Revolution, its effects rippled far beyond the shores of the fledgling United States. The British defeat was a blow not just to their colonial ambitions, but to the entire balance of power in the Western world. The victory at Yorktown signaled the potential rise of a new force on the world stage. But did the British truly understand the magnitude of what they had lost? The American Revolution had inspired movements of independence and self-determination across the globe. Across Europe and Latin America, the concept of a republic, a government elected by the people, for the people, took hold. Ideas of liberty and equality, once thought to be ideals reserved only for the privileged few, began to spread like wildfire. The British Empire, which had dominated the seas and continents for centuries, now found itself reeling from the consequences of Yorktown. A precedent had been set. Could it be that the British were no longer invincible? As the sun set on their colonial empire in America, new questions arose about their hold on other colonies. And for other nations seeking independence, Yorktown was the spark they had been waiting for. But America was not yet secure. The Treaty of Paris would still need to be signed, and Washington's victory at Yorktown was only the beginning of a long, complex struggle to ensure that the new nation survived. For now, the world was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Would America be able to stand on its own, or would this revolutionary experiment crumble under the weight of its own ideals? For the British, the real question remained: how would they regain their footing in this new world order? The echoes of Yorktown would be heard for years to come, as nations, once subjects to the British crown, began to imagine their own futures without it. Number 5. The Treaty of Paris. Could a simple document really seal the fate of an entire nation? The American victory at Yorktown was monumental, but the formal end of the Revolutionary War didn't come immediately after Cornwallis's surrender. It would take 2 more years of negotiation, struggle, and diplomacy before the Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3, 1783. And even then, the story was far from over. The treaty, signed by representatives of both the United States and Great Britain, was supposed to cement the terms of peace. But the process was anything but simple. The treaty's negotiations were complicated, with both sides trying to secure the best terms for themselves. While the American revolutionaries celebrated their military victory, they knew that the struggle for independence was far from over. The British, though defeated at Yorktown, were still a powerful empire. They did not easily relinquish control over their interests. America had much to gain from the treaty: recognition of its independence, control of vast territories, and the ability to shape its future. But there was a catch. In their negotiations, the American delegation was forced to make compromises. They agreed to certain territorial concessions, including the British control of Canada, and pledged to repay loyalists who had lost property during the war. The United States also had to promise to allow British merchants to recover some of their financial losses. But it wasn't just diplomacy that weighed on the minds of the American delegates. The question of America's future stability was ever present. With a vast territory to govern and a fledgling government, how would the United States navigate its relationship with European powers, not to mention its own internal divisions? In the end, the Treaty of Paris was more than just a piece of paper. It was the foundation upon which the United States would build its future. But the treaty did not resolve all of America's challenges. It was a precarious peace, and the questions raised by the war, about freedom, governance, and the nature of nationhood, remained unanswered. Was the treaty truly a triumph for the American cause? Or did it simply mark the beginning of a new set of challenges for a nation still finding its way? Number 6. Washington's leadership. What does it take to be the leader of a nation on the brink of greatness? After Yorktown, George Washington became a symbol of the new republic. His role in the victory had been crucial, but it was his leadership that would define the country's future. But as the dust settled, Washington faced new challenges that would test his resolve in ways he had never imagined. Washington had led his troops through the long and brutal years of war, and he had achieved a victory at Yorktown that many thought impossible. But with the British defeated, a new question arose. What kind of leader would Washington be in peacetime? The same qualities that had made him a brilliant general, determination, strategic vision, and the ability to inspire, would now be needed to guide the new nation through its infancy. But Washington's challenges were not just external. He had to deal with factions within the fledgling government, each with its own vision of what the United States should become. Some wanted a strong federal government, while others feared that a central authority would lead to tyranny. Washington, ever the cautious leader, navigated these divisions with care, attempting to strike a delicate balance between order and liberty. He was also faced with the task of ensuring that the promise of the Revolution, freedom and equality, was upheld. But the nation's future would not be shaped by Washington alone. In the years following Yorktown, the American people would need to decide what kind of government they wanted. Would they follow Washington's example, creating a strong national government, or would they allow the states to remain divided, weakening the unity that had been so hard-won? Washington's leadership during this critical time was not just about military victories. It was about the difficult work of building a nation. His legacy would be defined not by battles won, but by the choices he made during the peace that followed. Number 7. The road to constitutional government. Could the Revolution's ideals survive in the face of chaos? Even after the Treaty of Paris, the United States was far from stable. The Articles of Confederation, which had served as the country's first constitution, proved to be woefully inadequate for managing a nation. The central government was weak, unable to enforce laws, collect taxes, or maintain a standing army. The states, once united in their fight against Britain, now found themselves at odds with each other. The question facing the new nation was this: could a republic, founded on the ideals of liberty and democracy, survive in the face of such chaos? The answer, in many ways, would be shaped by the events that followed the American Revolution. Washington, along with figures like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, would soon push for a stronger federal government, one that could provide stability and protect the rights of its citizens. In 1787, the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia to address the nation's growing crisis. The debate was fierce. with different factions pushing for different visions of the future. But in the end, the Constitution emerged, a framework for a stronger, more unified government. It was a monumental step forward, but it was also a gamble. The Constitution would need to be ratified by the states, and even then, it would be far from perfect. Could the new government hold the nation together? Could it live up to the ideals of freedom and democracy for which the revolution had been fought? The road to constitutional government was not an easy one, and the story of the revolution did not end with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. It was only the beginning of a long, difficult journey that would determine whether the United States could truly become a nation that reflected the hopes and dreams of its people. Number 8. The impact of Yorktown on the British Empire. What happens when the world's most powerful empire loses its grip on the colonies it once ruled? The impact of the British defeat at Yorktown echoed far beyond the shores of the American continent. For centuries, the British Empire had been the dominant global power, its colonies spread across the world like a vast network. But the loss at Yorktown forced Britain to confront a new reality. The empire that had once seemed invincible was now vulnerable, and the war had exposed cracks in its foundation. Though Yorktown marked the end of the American Revolution, it did not immediately signal the collapse of British imperial ambitions. However, the defeat laid the groundwork for a significant shift in Britain's approach to its colonies. The defeat at Yorktown was not merely a military loss, it was a cultural and psychological blow to the British people, who had long prided themselves on their superiority and the strength of their empire. The British defeat in America prompted a re-evaluation of their global strategy. Britain was forced to redirect its attention to other territories, and while it would continue to hold a strong empire for several decades, the loss of the American colonies would be a blow from which it would never fully recover. In the years following the war, Britain would focus more on its influence in India, Africa, and the Caribbean, but the loss of the American colonies set a precedent that was hard to ignore. Other colonies began to question their own subjugation to imperial powers, and nationalist movements, inspired by the American Revolution, gained momentum in different parts of the world. The long-term impact of Yorktown on Britain was the realization that it could no longer control its vast empire in the same way. With the defeat in America, it became clear that the empire would need to adapt, perhaps even compromise, in ways it had never done before. The fight for freedom in America, embodied by the Patriots' victory at Yorktown, would reverberate in the decades to come, sparking revolutions in other colonies and challenging the foundations of European imperialism. Number 9. The global spread of revolutionary ideals. Could the victory at Yorktown really change the world? When the Americans won at Yorktown, they didn't just secure their own future, they set in motion a wave of revolutionary fervor that would sweep across the globe. The ideals of liberty, democracy, and self-governance, so central to the American Revolution, found eager audiences far beyond the borders of the United States. These principles, born from the struggle of the American colonists against the British Crown, inspired a generation of thinkers, revolutionaries, and leaders in Europe, Latin America, and beyond. The American Revolution was the first successful war of independence in modern history, and its success proved that it was possible for colonies to break free from European powers. This realization set the stage for other independence movements, particularly in Europe and Latin America, where people began to challenge long-established monarchies and empires. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, was directly influenced by the American Revolution and the ideals that had been championed by the Founding Fathers. The French Revolution, in turn, would inspire revolutions throughout Europe, as well as in South America. In Latin America, leaders like Simón Bolívar were inspired by the American Revolution's success and began their own struggles for independence from Spanish rule. Bolívar, often called the Liberator, drew heavily from the concepts of liberty and self-determination that had guided the American Revolution, and his efforts led to the independence of much of South America from Spanish colonial rule. The spread of revolutionary ideals was not limited to the Americas. In Europe, the ideas of liberty and equality found their way into the hearts of the oppressed. Though monarchies still held power, the events in America and France challenged the old order. The battle for liberty, which had been so costly at Yorktown, inspired political thinkers and ordinary people alike to question the legitimacy of absolute monarchies. It set the stage for the rise of constitutional governments and the gradual shift toward democratic ideals in the Western world. The echoes of Yorktown would be felt for generations. In every corner of the globe, People who longed for freedom and self-rule would look to the success of the American Revolution as proof that they, too, could rise up and chart their own course. The world was about to change forever, and the victory at Yorktown had lit the spark. Number 10. A Nation's Birth. The Struggle for Unity. Could America truly become a unified nation after all that had happened? The battle for independence had been won, but the fight for the soul of the new nation was just beginning. Yorktown was a military victory, but the challenges of creating a unified, functional government would test the strength of the American people. The Articles of Confederation, which had governed the country during the war, proved inadequate for managing the complex demands of a new nation. The American government was weak, and the states remained fiercely independent, each with its own interests and priorities. Washington and his fellow leaders knew that in order for the new republic to survive, they needed to find a way to unite the states under a single, effective government. This task was not an easy one. The divisions between the states were deep, and fears of tyranny ran high. Many Americans, especially those in the smaller states, were wary of a strong central government that might encroach on their freedoms. The road to the U.S. Constitution was fraught with difficulty. But Washington, Madison, Hamilton, and others understood that in order to make the United States work, they had to create a system that balanced the power of the federal government with the rights of the states. The result was the U.S. Constitution, which was drafted in 1787 and ratified in 1789. It provided a framework for a stronger national government, with checks and balances that would prevent any one branch from gaining too much power. But even with the Constitution in place, the challenges were far from over. The new nation would face internal conflicts, economic struggles, and external threats. And yet, despite these challenges, the United States managed to hold together, gradually evolving into the global power it is today. The question remained: could a nation born out of revolution, shaped by war and uncertainty, survive the test of time? Would the ideals of freedom, democracy, and equality, fought for at Yorktown, truly take root in a young country, or would the challenges of governance tear it apart? The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Yorktown was just the beginning of America's journey. Conclusion. The Battle of Yorktown marked the final, decisive blow to British rule in the American colonies, but its true significance lies in the long-lasting impact it had on the course of world history. Not only did Yorktown secure America's independence, but it sparked a wave of revolutionary movements across the globe, shifting the balance of power and reshaping empires. However, the battle was only the beginning. The road to establishing a functional and unified government for the newly independent states was long and fraught with challenges. It was through the courage, vision, and wisdom of leaders like George Washington that the ideals of liberty and democracy would be woven into the very fabric of the United States, a nation born out of the struggle for freedom. As we reflect on the Battle of Yorktown, we are reminded of the cost of liberty and the determination it takes to build a lasting nation. The story of Yorktown is not just a chapter in the American Revolution, but a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to fight for freedom, no matter the odds. The American Revolution was not just a fight for independence, it was a fight for the future, and the world would never be the same again. Is this conversation helpful so far?